afternoon and welcome to Capital Account. I'm Lauren Lister here in Washington, D.C. These are your headlines for May 9th, 2012. It's Europe Day. Happy Europe Day. At a time when many of the political parties gaining steam in multiple countries are those who want less Europe or want to reject it altogether. We'll speak to Eurosceptic, member of European Parliament, leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. He's making headlines after his party recently saw its best ever local election results, and he told European Parliament today the EU is done. Take a listen.
The EU Titanic has now hit the iceberg. It is a European Union of economic failure.
And on that note, is Greece the poster child for what happens when the price mechanism of democracy, which has been suppressed by technocracy, finally unleashes itself? Or will technocrats, Eurocrats, central bankers, and big money succeed in manipulating it? On a much lighter note, you may have seen celebrity ventures like this.
Russell Simmons, successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. He thinks everyone should be financially empowered, so he developed the Rush Card.
A prepaid debit card. Is this the kind of quote-unquote innovation that too big to fail banks are flocking to now to pass on the cost of regulations right back to consumers? We'll talk about it. Let's get to today's Capital Account. So, as you know, if you've been watching this show for several months, since the show began, we've interviewed UK and European Parliament politician Nigel Farage a number of times about the crisis in Europe. He's talked about the lack of democracy in Europe, the rise of technocracy, and predicted a country like Greece was headed towards some kind of revolution. For years, though, since the early 1990s when Farage was a founding member of the UK Independence Party, he has been a Eurosceptic, pushing for the UK to pull out of the EU altogether. For years, he was a lone voice in European Parliament, calling the Eurozone project a disaster, and people laughed at him. Now, he says, not so many people are laughing. And the numbers support that. Farage's party did the best it's ever done in recent UK local elections, seeing a major rise in support. And what we've seen in Greece looks akin to some kind of revolt against incumbent mainstream politicians, at least at the polls, with an increased support of fringe parties opposed to EU-prescribed austerity. Now, this has increased the prospects that a real government won't be able to form at all, and Greece will be sent back to elections, which we've talked about all week. Farage, in his speech to European Parliament today, talked about his view of what could possibly be a much more dire consequence.
In Greece, what we saw last Sunday was rather reminiscent of the German election of 1932. We saw the status quo centre collapse and the extremes of right and left rise. You know, this project could even cause the rebirth of National Socialism in Europe.
It's a bold statement. We asked him about it, and needless to say, that aside, Greece has become the poster child for the EU's political and fiscal medicine. But the recent election results and the subsequent rhetoric from new political leaders would seem to indicate the patient is finally spitting up this so-called cure. We talked to Nigel Farage today. Again, he's leader of the UK Independence Party, fresh off of a Europe Day speech in European Parliament, where he's also an MEP. I asked if he thinks this is an important turning point for a country like Greece and for the EU, or if he thinks Eurocrats in Brussels will just find another way, some way, working alongside their viceroys in deficit countries to keep Greece under their thumb. Here's what he said.
A democratic rebellion has begun. We saw last year in Finland a small anti-Euro party getting 20% of the vote, and it's spreading southwards now. And what you saw in Greece on Sunday was truly extraordinary, because since 1945, Greek politics has been dominated by a conservative party and a socialist party. Those two parties that have run the country since the war were reduced to less than a third of the vote. And what we saw were voters opting for the extremes of right and left, and in some cases, very extremes of right and left. And I tell you something, I was reminded of the German election of 1932, when the communists and the National Socialists had 51% between them. Now, there is no prospect of a government being formed in Greece. There will be another election in June, and my money says that the more extreme parties will do even better second time round. So it doesn't matter what Angela Merkel says. It doesn't matter what the Commission say. People are rebelling. They do not want to be part of the Eurozone. They do not want grinding austerity whilst their GDPs are declining hugely.
Okay, I want to get into a number of the things you just touched upon. First, I want to put this a little bit in economic terms, because we often talk about interest rates on this show, because we believe that they are one of the most basic signals in a market economy, yet they are constantly manipulated by policy at our various central banks in the U.S., in Europe, all over. The results are always a distortion of the free market price mechanism, and it seems that the same has been holding true with respect to democracy in Europe. The price mechanism of the electoral process, of the vote, has increasingly been dominated by technocrats, or placed in the hands of technocrats, who in the case of Greece are also not coincidentally central bankers. Could we say that the Greek elections, which you say are a rebellion, or are the equivalent of market forces overtaking the price fixing of democracy?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, don't forget that just 10 months ago, the elected Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Papandreou, suggested there should be a referendum in Greece to decide whether they stayed in or left the euro.
That's right.
Now, to the bully boys in Brussels, that was like blasphemy. And amazing, isn't it, that an elected Prime Minister was removed by the European Commission and my old friend Herman Van Rompuy, and they put a puppet government in place. Is it any wonder that the peoples of Greece are rebelling?
So then, you know, we're hearing already, Mr. Farage, reports that Eurozone officials are debating delaying or withholding the bailout money that's due to Greece on Thursday because of the political turmoil. Does this mean that these threats are becoming more and more insignificant?
My guess is that the short-term bailout money will be provided by the institutions in Brussels. Listen, you've got to understand one thing. I met Angela Merkel last November, and I said to her Chancellor, wouldn't it be better for the people of Greece to leave the euro, get the drachma back, and wouldn't it be kinder for your taxpayers who've already spent 20 years paying for the reintegration of Eastern Germany into Western Germany? You know, let's call it quits. Let's say the whole thing's been a terrible mistake, and let's divorce the two countries economically. And she said, but Mr. Farage, you must understand that if Greece leaves the euro, other countries will leave too, and that will be the end of our European project. And that's what it's about. This is about the maintenance of a political dream. Even though it's out of date, even though the economics are failing, that is what they're determined to do. So there's this real battle going on. My guess is, for the moment, they will get the bailout funds, but at some point in time, this Greek rebellion will go further.
Well, that's my question, because when you're talking about the market suppression of democracy in the name of what you just said was the dream of the Euro project, is the result, when the free market takes over, what we're seeing in Greece, the radicalization and the balkanization of a country, which you pointed to, where mainstream parties, the support for them is reduced, and fringe parties see larger support, and you just have a total fracturing of support for political parties across the spectrum.
Yes, I think that's right. You know, at some point in a not too distant future, we are going to get a government in Greece who are going to utterly reject austerity in a way that will make the break between the two happen. The differences will become irreconcilable. Greece is going to leave the euro. I can't tell you when that's going to be. My guess is it'll be in 2012. And I would think if we come back in 2 or 3 years and have this conversation, the eurozone will look completely different. It will in effect become a Northern Europe greater Deutschmark zone.
Wow, and you say you do believe Greece will exit the Eurozone, but you don't have a timeline. Is there anything that you would pinpoint that you think would be a turning point, or are we seeing it now?
Listen, if I had a timeline on when Greece leaves the euro, I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be down at the local bookmakers putting my money on. You know, you can never predict when these things are going to happen. I mean, you know, sorry, trouble with the earpiece. You know, I mean, you know, it was obvious that the Berlin Wall would fall, but who could tell on which day it would happen? This Eurozone project is a total and utter disaster. It is coming to an end. I know it's coming to an end. I was on my own saying that in this Parliament 4 or 5 years ago. I tell you what, there aren't so many people laughing at me now.
And you know, I do want to get to the rising support you've seen within the UK too, but first, you mentioned the Berlin Wall. Earlier, you talked about German elections in 1932. Yeah. You compared these Greek elections to those. Now, of course, in German elections in 1932, the Nazi Party, that was the first time that they gained the largest amount. They became the largest party in Parliament. In your speech today, you said in the European Parliament, you also said that in this interview, that we could see the rebirth of National Socialism in Europe now. Is this because you're concerned about the vote that we've seen go to the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn Party in Greece, winning them seats for the first time ever in Greek Parliament? They got 21 out of the 300 seats.
Yeah. I mean, look, there is an upside to voters rejecting the failed parties that have given them Europe, that have given them the Eurozone. There is a huge upside to it, but there's a downside too. And I mean, this Golden Dawn party that have got all of these votes in Greece are frankly, there's no avoiding it. This is a neo-Nazi party and a very dangerous party. And one of the ironies of the European project is that the project that was set up to make us all love each other is actually beginning to make us hate each other. And the Greeks now slag off the Germans, and they have cartoons of Angela Merkel wearing swastikas, and the German tabloid newspapers like Bild say the Greeks are all lazy, feckless and useless, and far from Europe coming together, Europe is being torn apart, and we are risking stirring up the very kind of nationalisms that the project was supposed to stop in the first place. I mean, look, communism was like this. Communism was supposed to make the world a fairer place, and you finished up with a brand new class system in Soviet Russia where the party members had even greater rights than the aristocracy that had gone before them. It is the law of unintended consequences.
We'll have more with Nigel Farage after the break. Also still ahead, celebrities have put their names behind prepaid debit cards. Now the U.S.'s biggest bank by assets is getting into the business too. We'll give you our 3 cents on why. But first, your closing market numbers.
What drives the world?
The fear-mongering used by politicians.
Who makes decisions?
Considerable breakthrough has already been made.
Who can you trust?
No one who is imbued with a global missionary zeal.
Where are we heading?
State-controlled capitalism is called fascism.
When nobody dares to ask, we do. RT, question more.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Welcome to the Alona Show. You'll get the real headlines with none of the mercy. The problem with the mainstream media today is that they're completely disconnected from the viewers and from what actually matters to those viewers. And so that's why young people just don't watch TV anymore. If they want news, they go online and read it. But we're trying to take those stories that people actually care about and transfer them back to TV.
Welcome back. We're talking to Nigel Farage today, leader of the UK Independence Party, who saw a lot of what's happening in Europe coming. He believes the recent election results we've seen mark a democratic rebellion in countries like Greece. So we talked about what this means for other countries that are heavily indebted in Europe and have also seen their borrowing costs rise. Take a listen. Spain and Italy and countries that have seen their borrowing costs rise. Do you think that we'll see them put more of their vote behind parties that are anti-austerity, that are opposed to Eurozone solutions?
The tragedy of the Eurozone was this. If you look at historic long-term charts and you look at Portuguese, Spanish and Greek interest rates and look at Deutschmark rates, and what you see through the 70s and 80s and 90s is a big gap. German rates relatively low and rates in the Mediterranean countries relatively high. As they approached joining the euro, they converged. And so what you had in these countries, and in Ireland too, effectively, you had interest rates that were 3 or 4% lower than they should have been for 7 years. It was like being at a party where your glass is being topped up all the time. Free money. It led to the most incredible speculative boom in property. It led in Greece to governments using this money to pay the public sector more, to allow people to retire earlier. It was a completely false, totally false economy that had been set up by totally artificial interest rates. And now, of course, what is happening is the spread, having narrowed, has widened out again as the markets say these governments are effectively bankrupt and we're not going to get our money back. So that's the tragedy of the euro. It should never have happened. Those of us that warned about this over 10 years ago were written off as being mad. We were told that economics had been reinvented. It has not.
Yeah, and people that have been warning about this, as you said, you have been gaining more and more popularity. In the UK local elections, you saw a lot of success. Your party, the UK Independence Party, the Eurosceptic Party, which wants the UK to leave the EU, saw its best ever local election results, averaging about 14% of the vote, where you had candidates standing reportedly at the expense of conservatives. So to what extent do you think the increase in your party's support is based on its stance on Europe versus other aspects of, for example, your domestic platform?
Well, I think the debate on Europe in the United Kingdom used to be about something called sovereignty. It used to be about who governs Britain. And necessarily, as a party in the early days, we talked about these things and we warned how bad the European Union would be for British democracy. Much as that was a very important argument, it didn't necessarily always appeal to the man in the street. But now what we talk about is not just who governs Britain, but how Britain should be governed. Because out there, across the United Kingdom, there are millions of people who now realise that the laws that are made in Europe directly impact their lives. We've got over 4 million small businesses who are drowning in employment regulations, in health and safety regulations, in environmental regulations. We've got an open-door immigration policy, a total open door to the whole of Eastern Europe. Anybody that wants to come to Britain from Poland can, and into the bargain, if they fill in the right forms, they qualify for housing benefit within 2 weeks. You know, people are getting very angry. We ourselves have got economic problems. We've got youth unemployment running at 21%. All the while, we have this open-door immigration policy. So UKIP is not seen anymore to be a party talking about some sort of, you know, highfalutin intellectual idea. We're a party addressing the everyday concerns of ordinary people, and we're a party now offering solutions. We're not just saying, Europe's awful, send a protest. We're now saying, vote for UKIP, because we're putting together a plan of how an independent Britain could and should be run.
So then are these, for example, a Conservative MP was quoted in a British paper saying that the gains your party has seen aren't just about Europe, which sounds like what you're saying, suggesting that this was a protest vote against Conservatives. So are those all of the issues that they're protesting against? If his
moment in time will always try and write off that surge in support as it being a protest vote. Well, there is quite a lot in Britain to protest about at the moment, so I wouldn't blame people for voting UKIP as a protest vote, but just look at our manifesto. You know, we're the people saying we don't want to pay £50 million a day to be a member of this club. We're the people saying we want Britain to be a self-governing democracy. We're the people saying we want to stop open-door immigration. We're the party saying we want to reopen the links that we used to have with the Commonwealth and the English-speaking world. We're the party saying we want children who come from poor backgrounds to get the best possible educational opportunities, and that used to be afforded by the grammar school system that we had. And above all, we're the party saying we are a party that believes in enterprise. We're a party that believes in hard work. We're a party that believes that you can't have schools and hospitals and the good things in life unless you've got people out there working, making profits and paying taxes. And so I think really to write off the rise in the UKIP vote, and we're up about 10% since the last general election on these recent local government scores. To write it off as simply being a protest vote, frankly, smacks of people in the establishment at the moment sticking their heads in the sand and just not recognising that there is a massive, massive political change that is taking place in the United Kingdom, and I would add, across the rest of Europe too.
Fair enough. I hear your point. It sounds like it's also part of a broader European trend. Now, I also want to note that you are the party, Mr. Farage, opposed to non-wine, I suppose. At least you had a non-wine party today. This is the tasting of a fruit-derived non-alcoholic beverage from one of the UK's leading wine producers. Sounds a little odd. Tell us what this is about and why this is a political issue for your party.
Let me give you the story. In my home county of Kent, we have a wine producer called Chapel Down, and they make very good sparkling wines and white wines, and they've won awards, and they're doing terribly well. They were contacted by an Argentinian company who said the 17th of April is World Malbec Day. What if we ship you across a container of Argentinian Malbec grapes, and you turn that into wine, and we do a joint venture, and we sell that product in England? And the Chapel Down winery said, yeah, that's absolutely fine, no problem at all. Until the mad bureaucrats from the Commission in Brussels intervened, and they ordered the company that they could not sell this product as wine. They had to sell it as a fruit-derived alcoholic drink made from produce imported from outside the European Union. I think it is just about the most balmy, absolutely insane piece of meddling from bureaucrats I've ever seen in my life. And today, the 9th of April, 9th of May, is Europe Day, when we're all supposed to celebrate how absolutely wonderful the European Union is. So I've just thrown a party to celebrate the total absurdity of this European project. You know, it's rather like the people that run this project, you know, they're in the temple, the walls are crashing down all around them, and all they can do is tell a firm in Kent that they cannot sell a product they've made as wine. It is total and utter nonsense, and really there's a serious point here, because it gets to the heart of much of what is happening across the Western world. The real battle that is going on here is a battle of democracy versus bureaucracy, and what we want to do in UKIP is get back to living in a democracy. We may well vote for governments that are absolutely useless, but at least once every 4 or 5 years we'll get the chance to turf the lot out and to replace them with somebody else. But to think that here we are paying in dutifully our £50 million a day so that a bureaucrat can tell a Kentish wine producer that his product is not wine. It absolutely beautifully, for me, on Europe Day sums up what a complete nonsense this whole thing is.
You are entitled to elections and calling your wine wine. I obviously misspoke if you didn't catch it when I called it a non-alcoholic fruit beverage. I obviously meant an alcoholic one, as Nigel Farage much more eloquently explained why. That was Farage. He's leader of the UK Independence Party. All right, let's wrap up with loose change. Dimitri and Shannon, let's talk about executive compensation at banks, because what's going on? Well, Bank of America had their shareholder meeting. 92% of shareholders approved the executive pay package. It's interesting because this went on amidst protests both inside and outside the shareholders conference. Meanwhile, you may recall that last month Citi voted down their executive pay package. The shareholders did on the say and pay vote only. Womp womp. It was non-binding. It's not binding according to Dodd-Frank. Meanwhile, and consequently, there was no big upheaval at Citibank Group. Au contraire, though, possibly in the UK, where shareholders are actually revolting against executive pay in the case of Aviva, which is an insurance company. Take a look.
Investors rebelling in London against the CEO of insurance giant Aviva. They don't like his pay, so today they forced CEO Andrew Moss out.
So forced him out by resignation. About a week after the vote, Moss resigned, and Aviva didn't give any explanation, but he resigned. So is this Is there anything to pull from this? That the too big to fail banks, if shareholders vote against their pay, it doesn't matter, but in the UK, maybe in different countries or with different industries, that it does matter?
I think this is a case where in the UK and in Europe, there's still some cultural and moral integrity left. Because regulations-wise, you know, MF Global went through London. So
well, I was just going to say regulations-wise, there's a huge gray area that allows for shadow banking, which London profits off of.
Right, but see, in the U.S., we try to regulate morality because we've had moral decay. So we need to kind of put the clamp on with everything we've got and the kitchen sink to try to put these bankers in shackles and prevent them from running wild in the economy.
Wait,
but in the UK...
Okay, so you're saying regulation is the attempt to legislate morality with bankers.
Right, because in the U.S., right, exactly. I mean, in the UK, they've got some draconian police laws, and yet if you go there, the cops are really nice, okay? It's only here that, like, there's been a cultural shift, and there's been a wholesale looting, whether it is the military, whether it's the police, whether it's the bankers. So I think that's an interesting part of the story.
I think it's interesting that they're willing, okay, say this is kind of PR, where some of these big CEOs that catch a lot of bad press, where they actually do get taken down or get their knighthood taken away, but yet these regulations that allow these horrible practices do continue, and this is kind of this PR thing or this sham. At least the big guys that maybe, you know, are untouchable in the U.S. get taken down.
Right, and that's
There's something satisfying about that.
Right. And it's shaming to have your knighthood taken away, but in the U.S., there's no shame. These guys don't care.
There is no shame.
They're like, let's loot, baby, loot.
Speaking of looting, guess what JP Morgan Chase is doing? They may be taking a cue, first of all, from Russell Simmons, reportedly to offset the cost of new regulations. Take a look.
Russell Simmons, successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. He thinks everyone should be financially empowered. So he developed the Rush Card. It's a prepaid Visa card. There's no credit check. Everyone is eligible to sign up. You don't even need a bank account.
So prepaid debit cards, Russell Simmons is doing it, has done it. Now Chase will start doing it, selling them in more than 5,000 branches. And what's reportedly a push to generate revenue with new fee-based consumer products. These are typically ones, in this case, that target people that can't afford checking accounts to offset the regulations that make them not overcharge people so much for overdraft protection. Don't allow them to overcharge merchants for using debit cards. It's just another way to,
Lauren,
take from the poor.
I like this.
Oh,
I like this. You know what? You're not. No, I'm serious.
We're out of time almost.
What is it? It's not a credit card. It's a debit card. Okay, it's prepaid. Basically, this prevents people from getting racked up and turning into serfs. They're prepaying for the card. So basically, all the services that you need plastic for?
I think it's just another way for banks to rack up fees, to pass the cost of regulation on to consumers. Okay, they're still issuing credit cards, so that hasn't gone away. But that's all we have time for. Let's wrap it up. Sorry, Shannon. We'll hear from you tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to come back tomorrow. From everyone here, thanks for watching and have a great night.